Welcome to today's episode of Data Talks, which is our free 45-minute webinar series about using data to inform housing policy. My name is Safik Amravati, and I am a policy fellow with the Housing Solutions Lab. And joining me today, we have three amazing practitioners and researchers in the housing space who will be talking about their work with pre-approved plans. We have Seva Rodnyansky, who's a research manager at the Pew Charitable Trust. We have Britin Bostick, who's a long-range planning and special projects manager at Fayetteville, Arkansas. And we have Jeff Dube, community planning and project manager at the Vermont Agency of Commerce. And I'm going to start today off with a brief introduction to the Housing Solutions Lab and the series. Seva then will present about Pew's findings from a nationwide scan on pre-approved plans. And then I'll have a conversation with Britin and Jeff about their work implementing pre-approved plans. We will then end with a 10 to 15-minute session to answer any questions that you may have about pre-approved plans. Please feel free to submit those questions via the Q&A function at any time during the webinar. We'll be monitoring it, and we'll do our best to get to any questions as you may have. If you're not familiar with the lab, we're based at the NYU Furman Center, and our mission is to help small and mid-sized cities plan, launch evidence-based housing policies with the goal of increasing racial equity, health, and well-being. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope that you will take time to view our past episodes on our website and register for upcoming ones. These webinars will be short and punchy with practitioners with experience on the ground like Britin and Jeff today, and we will post our recommended reading along with the recorded webinar on our website. I'll drop a link to this in the chat shortly, and now I'll pass it over to our guests so we can keep the time today.
Great. Thank you, Satvik. Like Satvik said, my name is Seva Rodnyansky, and I'm the research manager for the Pew Charitable Trust Housing Policy Initiative. Thank you again to NYU's Furman Center and Furman Lab, Housing Solutions Lab, for having me today, and for co-presenters and everybody who took part in this research. Pew's Housing Policy Initiative evaluates and researches promising housing policy areas, both in terms of increasing supply and making housing more affordable and available, as well as improving home financing and making it safer for all to use. And now I'm going to share some of my presentation on our recent research report, and I can also post a link to that research report in a little bit in the chat. Perfect. Please let me know if you can't see it. So we'll be talking about, I would say, a newly more popular policy that maybe some of you have not heard, or maybe some of you have heard about, but haven't necessarily seen implemented or used, and it's called the pre-approved building plans. Kind of in a nutshell, if you take one thing away from today, this is kind of like having TSA pre-check for permit approvals for housing. And really, it is a tool to help stem some of the delays associated with housing permitting processes, as well as perhaps make development slightly lower cost. Here's what I'm going to cover today in the next 10 or 15 minutes. What are these things? What problems are they trying to solve? Talk a little bit about the research and our approach. Talk about findings with a focus on benefits for local governments as well as developers and builders, and then kind of highlight the major takeaways and implementation, which will bridge well to Britin and Jeff's fireside chat after this. So if we take it back and think about the problem we're trying to, so these this policy is trying to solve is if you take a look at kind of a hypothetical typical housing project timeline, think of single family home, could be an apartment building, could be an ADU, right? There's generally a design phase where you think about what do you want to do and how do you want to do it, and draw specific plans. Then there's how are you going to pay for it, the finance. Then in certain places and for certain types of projects, there are discretionary boards and commissions, could be zoning, could be historic preservation, could be a variety of things. Then there's a permitting phase, and then there's construction. And delays can happen in a variety of areas, but often they occur in that discretionary board and commission timeline, and sometimes in the design phase as well. Now, are delays an issue? There's been a variety of work by multiple researchers to say that baseline approval times for buildings, even when they're done by right, that means they are already kind of can happen without additional discretionary approval according to the local zoning or land use code. The approval timelines still take 2 to 3 months, depending on whether it's single family and multifamily. And when discretionary approvals are in order, that can be up to 4 to 5 months. And again, this is approval times. This is not in the design phase. This is not in the construction phase. So this is kind of extra time in some ways in between. And this also depends on the level of regulations, right? There's some additional research that looks at how bad are delays currently, and it finds that depending on how heavily regulated your locality is the level of delay. So a highly regulated place like perhaps San Francisco has approval timelines that average 8.5 months, whereas a lightly regulated place, maybe something like Austin, Texas, has only 3.7 months. And if you kind of do this research on delays and do the research on the cost of delays, you find that there's a pretty big difference even in cost between the lightly delayed places, and that could be, the 5 month difference could be up to $22,000 cheaper for a single family home, for example. Okay, that was a lot of data on delays, but why is that such a big deal? As many of you know, practitioners, delays can really be costly and can kill projects at times, right? They can lead to canceled projects because the added costs make them financially unfeasible. These could be because of variable costs, such as additional insurance or utilities or overhead that you're carrying while you're waiting, or because interest is lost by key parties, such as your contractor may no longer be available, and so that adds more delays, or you have to find someone new. Investors might sour on the project because it's taking so long, or anchor tenants that you plan to have in the development might, they might find another place. And even for home ownership, that this prices families out of home ownership. There's a study that found that for every additional $1,000 that a home costs, more than 115,000 households are priced out at the national level. And you say, okay, well, how often does that happen from delays of every $1,000? There was a pretty specific study in Washington State that says that every month of delay costs $4,400 per month for single family homes. So that's actually quite a lot of homeowners that are priced out at every level. And it could be up to 1 to 3% of the project's total worth. And this accumulates, right? Because there's not just 1 month of delay. So in a place like Seattle, delays add about $30,000 to project costs. In a place like New York City, could be up to $50,000 per unit. Okay, that's the problem. But what are some of the solutions? Well, some of the solutions are, in this case, are a pre-approved plan. How can you maybe circumvent or reduce some of that delays by having something that is already approved up front? And so it can reduce some of the design timing, and it can reduce much of the discretionary approvals as well. So there's two basic types. One is a pattern book, literally a PDF or maybe even a printed book, which is a catalog of pre-approved building plans that are offered to developers. And I'll show a few pictures of this in the next pages. Examples of this are from Kalamazoo, Michigan, South Bend, Indiana, or Claremore, Oklahoma. And then there's kind of, in some ways, a simpler type called self-submitted building plans, or a library of plans, which allows developers to submit the plan that they've already used once or multiple times for preemptive approval if they reuse those plans in the future. And that's currently happening in Fairfax County, Virginia, and in Memphis. A more a more ambitious version of the self-submitted plans is that if one developer gets their plan approved, then another developer can apply to use that using those same approvals. So these are kind of the flavor of the different things, but let's look at it in practice. This is South Bend's pattern book, a few examples from it. You can go online and you can download this yourself. And what they provide is kind of multiple pictures of what a typical house would look like. They provide room dimensions and room locations, where the doors and where the windows are. There's a variety, there's some massing pictures. There's pictures of any kind of options, like where to put the porch or where to put the front door. And they have a variety of housing types. So on the left, you see kind of a traditional two-bedroom, smaller house that fits into the neighborhood vernacular. And on the right, this is, I believe, a 6-unit or 8-unit apartment building. So again, and the way that these are developed is that they are iteratively developed with stakeholder engagement, both builders, city officials, neighborhood groups, and they are basically looking to pre-approve a set of drawings that are palatable up front, as opposed to having that conversation for every home or ADU for every lot. And so once these are approved, they can bypass a variety of approval structure at the city level. A different example is here from Kalamazoo. This shows again the breadth of the types of plans they have. They have anything from a carriage house or ADU all the way to duplexes and fourplexes. And again, they provide relatively specific information, but not an overwhelming amount of information. And again, there's links in this presentation and elsewhere. So what does that do? Again, if we think back to our typical project timeline, pre-approved plans reduce the time for design. They reduce the need for discretionary boards and commissions in most cases, and they leave you with a much shorter project timeline when everything works well. And estimates suggest that this might be twice as fast relative to kind of business as usual, which can be a huge savings in terms of money and time, and just gets your projects built much faster. Now, that all sounds nice in theory, but are these common? Are they effective? What did our research find? So that's what me and my team were looking for. What's the scale of these? How many places have them? Where are they? Are there really time savings and cost savings? Have any homes been built? And what are some of the considerations from implementation? Well, how's the public reception been? Are there any best practices to learn from? So what did we do? We looked, we asked and looked and read everything that's been written on this topic before, and we found kind of as many robust programs as we could. And then we interviewed municipal officials, building professionals, and others to understand their interactions with these programs and how it's been. What we found is that about 45 programs exist in the US that are kind of active in doing something on pre-approved plans. They range from the Pacific Northwest to the center of the country to the East Coast. And on top of that, California, which is not pictured in this map mostly, has a mandate that each municipality and county actually has to offer ADU pre-approved plans as of last year. So if I put that, then the California dots would overwhelm this map. So think about this as about 45 programs plus ADU specific programs in California. What kind of homes are mostly offered in these plans? Most programs we looked at or talked to had at least some sort of ADU plan, whether that was interior or exterior, or sorry, a detached or attached ADU. Many had single family homes, and a minority had some sort of single family, whether that was plexes, duplexes, triplexes, or townhomes or apartment buildings. And one plan had as large as a 12-unit apartment building that was pre-approved, kind of ready to go. One thing to note is that most programs are new and most cities have yet to build using their plans, which I think is going to be a good conversation with Vermont and Fayetteville to see how they're ramping up. We found that only a few cities or counties have really scaled up, and here's some examples that have really built some units in the past 5 or 10 years. Hawaii County and South Bend stand out. Seattle stands out for its ADUs. Jackson, Michigan is a smaller industrial town, a couple hour and a half outside of Detroit that has built 100 single-family homes using these programs. In Claremore, Oklahoma, which I think was recently featured in a Washington Post article for these plans. They built 25 homes. In the picture on the right is one of my colleagues who traveled to South Bend, and that blue home next to her is actually a pre-approved plan home. And most other programs we talked to, other than these five, have reported either kind of single digits or didn't report any sort of production. Let's talk about the benefits. So the biggest benefit that anybody cited, especially builders, was time savings. It was the top reason, and savings in time for the process were anywhere from a couple of weeks to maybe 9 months faster. In the table on the right, you'll see there's a time reduction, kind of depending on what your baseline was. There was a pretty big time reduction, and they reported also some direct cost savings, possibly from not having to pay for the designer, possibly for other kind of ancillary costs related to discretionary approvals of about 5,000 to 10,000 per unit, or about 1.5% to 3% of project costs. So not huge, but certainly something off the bottom line. There were some pretty high estimates as well, up to 35K per unit, but I think a more general estimate is 5,000 to 10,000 per unit. And everybody also suggested that this was a great tool to encourage small and emerging developers. These types of programs help clarify and shorten the development process and make it more easily to do, approachable for newer developers, minority developers, nonprofits, and even homeowners. And what we heard as well is that why do these types of developments matter? Well, because they're the ones doing the infill development. And eventually, small developers grow into large developers. So this is a way to develop your developer cadre, to use a double entendre. How about local governments? So local governments cited that increases in new housing supply were important, but so was a more efficient use of land, especially through infill. And kind of the one of the bigger takeaways from these is that it really was about organizational efficiency. Even if not that many units were created using these programs, it saves staff time where they were. And here's a quote from John Ziana, at that point the Chief Development and Infrastructure Officer in Memphis. So when their city put together this pre-approved building program, it presented an opportunity for internal organizational housekeeping so that different departments can talk together, work together to be housing ready. And sometimes that included outside of the city departments, like the utilities, county agencies, and others. And finally, a note about implementation, as I'm sure we'll get to in the next section. But the key things we've heard about how to implement these in the best possible ways is to do your community engagement and ensure that the interests align, the designs align with what the community wants and needs. That doesn't just mean huge, McMansion type homes. In fact, again, in South Bend, Kalamazoo, and other places, the community wanted a variety of home types, not just single family homes, especially in their infill neighborhoods. And by doing this community engagement up front, you reduce or perhaps eliminate the fights about each individual parcel. Leveraging external stakeholder support was important. Some participants in our interviews estimated that only the largest municipalities can really implement a program without any form of external support. So cities used grants, philanthropic dollars, ARPA dollars to kind of stand up one of these. And then long-term planning, right? What a pre-approved or a pattern book that works today may not work for a couple of years from now, or may need continuous innovation. And so as these programs are being set up, thinking about how is this going to be managed forward, especially if there's significant take-up, is an important piece of the puzzle. So again, this is my last slide. Want to make sure that people think about, why is this important from this hour today? So pre-approved plans are promising because they can save builders money and time, and they save cities they say cities with less pushback than other pro-housing policies. They're at the same time, they're new and few. This is a growing policy, but fewer than 50 cities and counties have published any plans outside of the California ADU mandate, and those programs are newer. And finally, these should be considered as a suite of options, not just the only thing localities do. Not a substitute for perhaps more sweeping reforms, such as allowing homes on small lots, or reducing minimum parking mandates, or modernizing building codes for small apartment buildings. And now I'm happy to pass it on to my co-panelists.
Thank you so much, Seva, for that presentation. We're going to jump right into a fireside chat since we're running a bit late. I'm joined by Jeff and Britin. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll dive right into questions. So Britin, you're a long-range planner at the City of Fayetteville, an early implementer of permit-ready plans, and Jeff, you are a community planning and project manager at the state of Vermont, and the agency implementing a statewide pre-approved plan system. Can you both detail the motivations behind your agency slash jurisdiction pursuing pre-approved plans?
Be happy to start. For us, it was about our population growth and housing demand. So Fayetteville's grown about 3% annually. For us, it's about 2,700 people. And that's not totally including all the students at the University of Arkansas that have been added to their enrollment in that same time frame. So with a really popular downtown area that had very low density housing, and I think overall we're like less than 4 units per acre, which is just very, very low for a downtown. We had a lot of demand that was creating housing that people found to be not really in character with the existing neighborhood fabric. So the additional housing we needed was getting a lot of pushback, exactly what Seva was, kind of alluding to in their presentation. And so for us, we needed a solution that would help reduce friction in getting that much needed housing and getting it, importantly, in infill locations, which was a really big priority of our city comprehensive plan, but something that we had kind of struggled with the outcomes that we were getting in the community, negative response to that. So we wanted to see if we could turn that
around. Awesome. Really what Seva and Britin said, right? I think for Vermont, it was part housing demand and need, but also cost across the board. If you can build for $300 a square foot in Vermont, you're doing it really, really well. So we needed to do everything we could to bring down costs incrementally. As Seva said, this is not a silver bullet, but what we're trying to do is show folks how to lower soft costs and build smarter, if you will, build more affordably with some of the housing that we're proposing, but also recognize a gap in the production of housing that we're currently seeing in Vermont. We've got a lot of larger single-family homes on large lots going up. We've got a lot of large apartment buildings in our downtowns going up, but we're not seeing that missing middle housing style that we know and understand would really benefit Vermonters across the board. So we wanted to deliver a suite of resources to small-scale developers to help that process along. It's tough to build at the 4-unit scale just with code complexity, and it's expensive. So we needed to provide them with construction-ready, pre-reviewed, permit-ready drawings to ease that pathway and reduce friction for them. And beyond that, I would say the pre-approved plans, it's a great way to have a broader conversation about housing reform in Vermont. Statewide. So we're looking really to treat the housing production as a larger ecosystem and start to streamline these different problems to be solved, if you will, like permitting, design, code compliance, procurement, and offsite manufacturing to really provide just a resource that brings all of these pieces together into a comprehensive package and plan.
Yeah, and I want to touch apart that point a little more. Both of your jurisdictions enacted simultaneous reforms along with pre-approved plans. Britin and Jeff, can you tell us more about how you decided upon these reforms and what other jurisdictions who might be considering pre-approved plans should do simultaneously to make sure that their pre-approved plans are successful?
was actually one of the more fun parts of this entire project for us was working with our builder community to understand what they consider to be roadblocks in the home construction process. So is there any thing that's a development requirement or something, that's kind of a policy that repeatedly gets in your way, causes a pain point, et cetera. And they were really clear about a couple of things, parking requirements, and we have a requirement to build sidewalk with new home construction. And they were like, we will pay you to build the sidewalk, but we don't want to build the sidewalk. Your inspectors are very harsh and very exacting. And so if you want the sidewalk to be that way, you go build it yourself. We'll pay for it as long as you don't make us, because this is holding us up for weeks sometimes from getting the house on the market. And that was incredibly valuable feedback. So we had a kind of a tailored list of for us, it's an ordinance. We brought an ordinance to city council and said, city council, in order to support the program, which is voluntary, we offer these carrots, if you will. So the sidewalk fee in lieu is one. We reduced parking so that instead of the typical 2 spaces per dwelling unit, it's 1 space per dwelling unit. If you use the program, that was really attractive. And then a couple of other things. Well, we also had a few design standards that we implemented so that you wouldn't get, for example, like 5 repeat houses in a row that all look exactly the same. Because that was one of the things that the community had told us. They don't want to see that anymore. They don't want to see the same house repeated down an entire block. And so that has actually been, I think, one of the better ways to pilot development standard changes at a maybe a more attainable scale if people are concerned, about what the results might be or unintended consequences. Or city council was very comfortable ultimately with saying yes to those things because they felt like it was a manageable scale to test those concepts out. And I think that was a really great thing that we included with the program as a whole. But I think you should definitely work with your builder community to understand what would be a carrot or a motivation for them.
I think in Vermont, it was partially recognizing the disconnect between homes and communities that Vermonters love and want to live in, and those places like the walkable downtowns connected to centers with neighbors around, and what would zoning allow, right? So we've been beating up on zoning for a while, but we still recognize this disconnect. So what we wanted to do with things like the Home Act and Act 181 was create conditions that were more conducive for missing middle housing and what we'd ultimately propose through Homes for All and the 802 Homes catalog. And I'll note that 802 is our statewide area code, so that's where the number's coming from. So it was really just making sure that once we went live with the catalog or went forward with more missing middle housing reform, we had conditions on the ground that were supportive of that housing style.
Yeah. And Britin, I know that Fayetteville is pretty far along the project. Can you tell us about what has been the biggest stumbling block or roadblock that Fayetteville has faced in implementing pre-approved plans?
Really one of the hardest things for us, because we were so early in kind of this process nationally, is how do you figure out the legal side? You're not just dealing with the procurement process, you're dealing with copyright and liability and other things that come along with architectural plan sets. And so for us to either hold ownership or hold copyright of plan sets, that was going to have certain implications for us that the city had never encountered previously. And then for us to license those, which is ultimately the direction that we went. So we don't own our plans outright, we license them from a vendor. I think in a lot of ways that was the absolute best call for us as an organization, and also for the designers of the plan sets. They get to maintain ownership and they license them to us to use, and then our customers sub-license those. And there's kind of a series of steps and agreements along the way that I think, kind of do what they need to do to maintain everybody's ownership and use, and how these things are used by customers and by the city. But figuring all of that out was a bit challenging. And then I always say this every single time I talk about this, you really have to know what your state's architectural licensing requirements are and how that affects how you develop a program, because each state is different. And I found that in Arkansas, we had certain architectural licensing requirements at the state level that we had to make sure that our program was going to comply with. And we ended up working quite a bit with the state to make sure that we were good with them, and that we had met all of their requirements as well. And they were great to work with, but I think that took a little bit of time to make sure everybody was on the same page and also understood what this was going to end up doing.
Yeah. Those are really timely concerns. And I know that Jeff, you implemented 802 plans at a statewide level and had to work with local municipalities. Can you detail what those challenges were working with your local towns and how it was being one of the first, I think, nationwide implementations of pre-approved plans?
Yeah, I mean, so we're still mid-process now. I think there's going to be a lot of lessons learned once we're done. But just a quick shout out for Britin for answering the call when we were still in the RFP phase for this. She was incredibly helpful in navigating some of those challenges that she mentioned, so we didn't run into the same roadblocks. But I think fundamentally our challenge is a bit different working at the statewide level. We've got a statewide building code, but we do allow municipalities to adopt their own building code and delegate that process at the local level. So we've been working hard to sort of thread that middle ground and identify the path forward that's going to work for all of those municipalities. And of course, everybody's zoning is different if you have zoning in Vermont. So just trying to find that middle ground again and what's going to work and feel right in communities and meet that pre-approved goal that we have there. I think one of the concessions that we're looking at now is just this idea of offering multiple exterior treatments. So if you're operating within a design review district, you might have the opportunity to say, approve the 4 square starter home with this exterior package versus the other. And then so with that, there might be a little bit of an add-on, if you will, to the home design package, just to make sure that you're meeting the design intent of that district ultimately. But we're still sort of mid-process in that. I would say the other thing that we ran into with 802 Homes is we're trying to stand up a home design package that will work with stick-built structures like platform framing the way we've done it, but also offsite construction, be it modular, like panelized or volumetric modular. So we've been working with offsite manufacturers across northern New England to understand what their factory limitations are so we can design the homes directly to that and again sort of find that common ground that would allow all of these offsite manufacturers regionally to participate in the program. And I think one of the early things we identified was just the module width and what will be allowed down the road without extra police detailing and without extra fines, if you will, for transport costs. So again, just trying to work regionally to understand the right pathway forward for that offsite construction limitation. And just more globally, there's a lot of things in tension with what we're trying to do with 802 Homes, be it the offsite volumetric modular constraints about like how big the Lego block can be, if you will, but also just livability and affordability, right? We're trying to deliver homes at a price people can afford. And that extra bedroom with that office space that people want sometimes comes into conflict with the overall goal of delivering that affordable price. So we're just trying to thread that needle.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm going to jump right to Q&A because we have a lot of people asking some great questions. And Seva, feel free to jump in to some of these questions. I think building off that last point, a lot of people are wondering who the customers for these plan sets are. Are they developers, property owners, residents? Britin, if you want to go first, detailing who has been the targeted audience for your pre-approved plans program, that'd be great.
Definitely. So for us, it was going to be a variety of different customer types, existing property owners. Funny enough, at the time that we launched, we were seeing just an absolute wave of university student parents purchasing property so that they could kind of make an investment while their students in school for 4 or 5 years and then sell that investment or, rent it, etc. So some of our customers were actually out-of-town parents, people who are very interested in using the program. And asked a lot of questions about it. And then also our builder community. So people might, they might have a customer themselves who says, hey, here's my property or here's the lot I'm going to buy. I need a house design. And they might say, hey, we can kind of make that process go much more quickly for you if you want to go ahead and select from this set. But I've also had real estate agents working for clients who have reached out with a lot of questions about the program. So we knew we needed it to work for pretty much everybody, right down to grandpa building an ADU in the backyard, honestly.
Yeah, 100%. I would say it's all of the above, but in Vermont, I think our primary audience is really the small scale developer, as Seva alluded to. We're a state of about 700,000 folks. Um, don't quote me on the number, excuse me, but we recognize that in our smaller communities, it's going to take that small scale developer that might have some experience in the trades or building process to deliver homes in their community. So the big overall goal of Homes for All really was to stand up a cohort of small scale developers and provide resources to allow them to build within their community, whether it be property owners or, again, like general contractors or designers that have a little bit of experience in this world. And hopefully get some more uptick. At the end of the day, 5 homes a year in some of our smaller communities can make a huge difference, particularly if they're geared towards more of that age in place need that we're seeing in Vermont. We've got an aging population with shrinking households, so we really need to address that mixed match in between the housing stock that we've got, primarily like our 3-bedroom structures, and try to build some of those smaller units that would accommodate age in place varieties as well.
And just to broaden it, I think to our kind of national scan of who's using this, and because it was really important for us to try to see of the houses that have been built, I think we've been able to talk to developers and builders who are using it. I mean, there's residents, whether that's for own or for rent. Some people are using this as kind of a build to rent model. I know in South Bend and a few other places, there's been kind of affordable housing developers, even scattered site LIHTC, low income housing tax credit, that have used this. Kalamazoo nonprofit developers in Jackson, Michigan, they were using ARPA dollars to set a very clear ceiling and to make homes for purchase affordable. So again, it really runs the gamut of who's using this.
Yeah. And then we have another question about how to account for varying site conditions and other codes beyond the building code, water, sewer, and other utilities when doing these pre-approved plans, especially when it comes to stick build. Seva, do you want to take this question?
So from what we've heard in terms of flexibility, and I saw there was multiple questions in the Q&A about kind of unit and building flexibility, about topography and site challenges, right? So certain programs kind of build an amount of flexibility in, whether that's in the licensed programs or in the pattern book programs. So have a porch, not have a porch, have a front entrance, not have a front entrance, door on the side, door on the front, right? So kind of very static set. And I think that kind of keeps the cost down. And then in most cases, there's an option to then further work with that architect or designer to make a more, to make some sort of modifications. And pretty much all the cases we've talked to, though, the building plan, might be pre-approved, but the site, you still have to go through site planning. And I'm sure Jeff and Britin are gonna jump in about that. But as I think some of the questions about topography, so this does not get rid of the site plan process. I think that could be a whole nother conversation about how that could be maybe streamlined in any case. But right, so as a result, things about the topography and the site itself is still in play. I think there was another question about kind of utility and city interplay that I think maybe we should take after this one, especially with Jeff and Britin.
This was another challenge operating statewide, right? Vermont, we're a mountainous state. We've got a lot of varying site conditions. So where we landed was just this recognition that it's going to be pre-approved. Division of Fire Safety and the local jurisdictions are going to have a lot of familiarity with the plans, but there will always be that number of site-specific elements that they'll have to review and confirm when they use the plans. In terms of the foundation, though, we did land on this idea of a narrow window of site conditions where the plans would operate in with a series of performance specifications for the foundation. So like if you check this boxes with soil compaction and load bearing capacity and hydrostatic pressure, you can build this foundation with this qualified contractor and it will be, it'll meet the code and the standards for life safety. If you operate without outside of that range, you'll just have to go back through the design process to make sure that you're designing something that works for your particular site, whether it be a step foundation or something a little bit different in terms of its approach.
I think our challenges are similar to what you've heard, but the way that we're contemplating trying to move a solution forward on that right now is to this is really challenging in Fayetteville, where our lots are not a standard size configuration or dimension typically. And so we're kind of contemplating what amounts to a site, like a model site plan that you could kind of enter dimensions into. And then if you have a condition where you're on a steep slope and you need an engineered foundation, this is a little bit kind of crazy, but our foundation standards are actually codified in our city ordinance. So as long as your foundation is designed to meet our ordinance, in most cases, you're going to be fine. And we kind of in our plan sets have that cross section already in the plan set for customers. So it's like we've kind of pre-solved the foundation unless you're on a really steep slope. Our program area doesn't cover those steep slope areas on purpose, but we're trying to figure out if you have like a kind of a template for a site plan, can that help people along in the process? Or is the answer going to be, you're just going to have to hire somebody who's qualified to do that type of drawing, provide that to the city as part of your plan set. And so that's something that honestly, we're still working through what the best solution for our customers is going to ultimately be.
Well, I see that we have plenty more questions in the chat, but it looks like we are at time. And so we're going to share our emails and feel free to contact the lab. We have an Ask the Lab page. Claudia will put in the chat a link that you can use to ask us any further questions, and we're happy to follow up with any questions that you might have or any resources or connect you to Jeff, Britin, or Seva. Yeah, and I think and thanks so much to our panelists today for joining us and taking the time during their lunch hour to talk about their work. And yeah, if anybody has any final thoughts to jump in.
So much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Feel free to reach out. If we didn't get to your question, I'm happy to answer that.
Same. Thank you all.
Thanks.